Today on With the First Pick, we're doing something a little different. It's a draft based on team needs. That's right. The bigger the need, the higher a team is going to be on our board. I'm Ryan Wilson. That's former Titans GM Rand Carthon. This is episode 245. And Rand, time's a ticking, my man. We got 11 days.
Ooh, almost there.
To the 2025 NFL draft.
Almost there.
11 days out. What are NFL teams doing in preparation? I noted right before we came on here that Will Johnson, the cornerback from Michigan, is having a workout today for NFL teams. So some late stragglers, maybe health-wise, but otherwise, what are you guys doing to get ready?
I mean, you're just tightening up the board. You know, you got these last couple workouts coming in. You know, getting more information in from the medical rechecks to see where guys are going to be, and just tightening up the board, kind of going into your bunker a little bit because misinformation season is upon us. And so from there, you're just trying to block out all the noise.
I don't want to harp on this, but I went back. I fell asleep watching draft day the other day when I talked about it. So I went back and watched the end of it. So the next to last scene, I don't want to spoil this for you. It's just fast forward 30 seconds, is Kevin Costner, the Cleveland Browns GM, calling the Jacksonville Jaguars GM. Number one, he didn't know the guy's name. He was a first-year GM. On what planet would you not know anyone in someone else's front office's first name at the top of the masthead there? That's impossible, right?
Oh yeah, that's impossible. At least even if you don't know names, because I work with a few guys who are terrible with names, you're at least going to stop someone and say, "Hey, what's the guy's name?" And so you at least have that.
Right. So then he calls the guy to try to talk him into a trade, and the Jaguars GM admits he has picked 6 or something. The Jaguars GM admits that the first 2 guys that went ahead previously on picks 4 and 5 were his guys. He doesn't know what to do, and he's saying this to another GM as you're on the clock to make a draft pick. So that seems on the realism scale, what, a 98 out of 100?
Yeah, I give you that. Hollywood, man, they got to add their twist and their drama to it, but no chance in real life.
Because I would imagine if the owner's sitting there hearing the new GM talk like that, that's going to be a short conversation. But anyway, draft day, I look forward to that watch party with you in the middle of August when we have nothing else to do and making you go scene by scene and telling us what's real and what isn't.
Yeah, Netflix got you again last night.
Got me again last night. I'm through with those, so let's see what happens next. All right, by the way, we got a busy 2 weeks here, Rand, back in the real world. We got shows this Wednesday, and then on Thursday, things are going to get crazy. Debo is trying to kill us. We're going to do a live 7-round mock draft over on YouTube, and that's at NFL and CBS. That's right, 7 rounds. We'll have a rotating crew of guys, including Rand, and we'll be live in the chat answering a bunch of questions. Debo will help produce that. Stryker will help produce that. It all starts at 3 p.m. Eastern this Thursday. And if you want to ask Rand a question, if you want to ask B-Mac a question, or Lige Douzable, former NFL players, you can do that. Emery Hunt, Chris Trapasso, Mike Renner, Josh Edwards. It's going to be a long 4 hours for me. The high-profile talent like Rand get in and out of there in the first and second round. But I'll be here for the duration. So come and check that out. By the way, one other quick football note. I forgot to ask you, Rand. How did the flag football go with your kids yesterday? You told me that your 6-year-old had to score. Did he make that happen?
Yeah, they crushed it, man. 2 mercy rule victories. The mercy rule is 35 points. If you're up by 35 points at any point in the game, the game is officially over, and then the teams have to choose if they want to continue just more in the practice form.
Yeah. So
game 1. My 6-year-old, he scored on a long run, caught an extra point. But my oldest son, he had 3 picks and a pick 6. So it was his coming out party. Mercy ruled those guys, but then we finished the game. Then the second game, Mercy rules those guys with 11 minutes left in the game. My oldest son had a long touchdown run. And so it was funny that the coach, we were like, "Hey, you want to keep going? We could just treat this like practice, get reps for the kids." He's like, "No, we're good. Let's wrap it up. Let's get out of here." So we're rolling right now, 5-0.
You ruined that man's Sunday. Then you asked him if he wanted to extend the beating. He said, "I got to go home. I got to go home." He had to hit the evening service at church because he had to get right. All right, well, that's great news for the Carthons. Coming all together there. You made a friendly wager with your 6-year-old, and he came through on it. And your 8-year-old is busting out too. All right.
Yeah.
Here we go. Let's see if we can explain this for everyone. And Debo, you let me know how far off the path I get here. So as for today's show, just to clarify, we're going to run through all 32 picks This is a team needs mock draft. So things like records or where you're currently situated in the draft order won't necessarily matter for us today. What matters is simply this: the bigger the need, the higher you're likely going to be on our team needs board, and the higher that team will likely get drafted. All right, we'll mention some players that could fill those needs along the way, but this is less about specific fits and more about how we value which team needs. What team needs they are heading into the 2025 season. And by the way, the criteria for constitutes big needs can be different for me than it is for Rand or for you guys who are watching and listening, but we'll explain ourselves as we go through this thing. And if nothing else, hopefully this will give you a better understanding of, number one, the needs of all 32 teams, and number two, how a GM thinks through the process in the days leading up to the draft. All right, Rand, does that seem relatively clear?
Yep, let's do it.
Debo, any thoughts? Is that okay?
That was flawless. Now it's on you guys to execute.
All right. I'm picking first. So again, the draft order doesn't matter. The Tennessee Titans have the first pick. The Philadelphia Eagles have the last pick. And we know all the picks in between because we've talked them to death over the last few months. So in terms of team needs, this is how I'm thinking about it, Rand. And Rand and I haven't really talked about what our team needs draft board looks like. But the most important position is quarterback. So if you don't have a quarterback, that's where the conversation starts for me. And then after that, it went to offensive line. And then if you want an edge rusher, if that's important to you, that's where I slotted these guys. And then I also considered not just the how good or bad you were last year. Some teams are only maybe a player or two away. So they were higher on my board in terms of team needs. If you get that player early in the draft, you have a better chance of making that Super Bowl run. And then other teams are rebuilding, and they got to get it right this year in order to take the next step to get to 500 and then get to the playoffs in years down the road. So that's my thinking on that. Did you have any thoughts on how you built your team needs board based on positional value?
So I just went singularly, just the number one need for a team. And also just going back, because, you and I, we've talked to team needs before, and you've seen my team needs board and how I put it together, and just doing more. I did more research on this one because what we've put in mock drafts, some of them I went against those as to why other positions would make sense instead of going there. And we'll talk about that more as when we get into the picks. But I just went singularly the number one position of need, which may not necessarily coincide with what everyone else thinks, but I can give you an explanation and a reason why this would make sense for them to choose this position over what is being reported in the media so far.
And by the way, I'm stealing Rand's team needs chart. So I'm like the Jaguars, the young Jaguars GM on draft day. I need some help as you walk me through the process. I still can't
on the movie draft day. I don't want to get you in trouble because Jacksonville does have a young first-time GM.
Yeah,
and
that's
I don't
right.
want people to think you're talking about James Gladstone, so you even know his name. So we're not the movie. We're not the movie.
Thank you for that clarification. Like Kevin Costner, I don't remember the movie version of the Jaguars first-year GM. And that's right. I'm not talking about Mr. Gladstone, who is well into his 30s. He might be Debo's age, which is crazy to think about. All right, next up, here we go. Or first up, I should say, 2025 NFL team needs. I have the first pick. I'm picking odds. You are picking evens, Rand. And the biggest need for me is the team picking at the top. Tennessee Titans, they do need a quarterback. And given we've talked about these quarterbacks to death at this point, and everyone, us included, has Cam ranked a little bit higher than Shador and then the rest of that group. So if I'm Tennessee, the biggest need is quarterback. I'm taking Cam Ward. They're not one player away from going to the Super Bowl, but I think they got to get this right because I've said this before, and I've seen people on the internet disagree with me, but you can have 21 Hall of Famers. If your quarterback isn't very good on any team, you're not going to consistently win football games in January and certainly February. So I went with Tennessee. Mark him off the board. Number one on the team needs board. They're number one in real life, and their biggest need is quarterback. So, we don't have to necessarily talk about players, but I would take Cam Ward here as my dude. The clock starts now. Do not answer the phone if Kevin Costner calls you, Rand.
Trust me, my phone is on Do Not Disturb, so he wouldn't get through unless he double called anyway. So I had Cleveland, and like you, I went with the quarterback position for obvious reasons. The owner, Jimmy Haslam's come out and he's spoken about their known hit and miss or swing and miss with Deshaun Watson and them wanting to get that position correct. Signed Joe Flacco last week. I don't think the signing of Joe Flacco indicates what they want to do for this position because signing Joe Flacco just puts them in a position to where they could be patient as to when they take the quarterback.
Right.
For me, you still have to address this position. I think since 1999, they've had 38 different starting quarterbacks. So you have to come away with a quarterback for the sustainable future of this organization. So that's what I would do as their most pressing need at quarterback. Now, you look at it, and they're sitting at number 2, and they'll be staring at a Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter, which you expect for them to take one of those two. But if I were in that spot, I would look long and hard at addressing this quarterback spot and finally solving that issue that is, caused the organization to struggle since coming back in 1999.
That's right. And in real life, the Cleveland Browns are picking number 2 as well. And Debo, I'm going to make an assumption, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. This draft doesn't necessarily matter in terms of the players available for our team needs draft, because if you're, if there are only 2 quarterbacks available in this draft class that we think are first-round picks, and we have 4 teams that need quarterbacks, that should still be the draft order in terms of when they come off the board. Does that sound right?
Yep.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so Cleveland's off the board. Tennessee's off the board. Number 2 on my big board, Rand, in terms of team needs, and this is the exact opposite conversation of Cleveland and Tennessee right now, Pittsburgh Steelers, because they need a quarterback desperately, and they're going to be number 3 in our conversation here. And again, it doesn't matter that there are only 2 quarterbacks in this class, but they need a quarterback desperately, and that's their biggest need. After that, though, if you consult the Rand Carthon team needs chart, running back is number 2, and that's fair enough. That's not a huge need if you're putting these needs together. But at the top, if you don't have a quarterback, I've said it a million times, currently it's Mason Rudolph and Skylar Thompson. And even if it's Aaron Rodgers, he's going to be there 1 year max. I can't imagine he'll be there 1 year. And if we're being honest, I don't know if he would play the entire year anyway, for age-related reasons or maybe some other issues. So Pittsburgh Steelers, number 3, off the board. All right. Your pick 4, Rand. Who you got?
All right, I'm on the clock, and for me, it was Chicago. I have Chicago and their need at offensive tackle, particularly left tackle. Caleb Williams, who they took in the first overall last year, was the most sacked quarterback in 2024. I think he was sacked 68 times. And then the next guy behind him was C.J. Stroud with 52. So that's 16 times more than the person at number 2. And so they pulled 2 trades and getting Jonah Jackson and Joe Tooney to shore up the interior of their O-line. And so I think getting a left tackle here early, in this part of the process will kind of help them with their O-line fixer-upper project in which they're doing. And if you're familiar with their situation, Braxton Jones, who had been their left tackle, I think he only appeared in 6 games last year and then suffered a fractured ankle in week 16. And he will be a UFA following the season. So I don't see him as being a part of the future in terms of receiving an extension plan beyond there. So I have them on my big board as my number 2 team with their need at left tackle.
And that's an important point, because a lot of times when fans comment on / get angry at these sort of team individual mock drafts they do, they say, well, we already have Darnell Wright. We just drafted him. We have Braxton Jones. They like him. Well, Braxton Jones' contract's up, and he has the recent injury concerns. And when you're a GM, you have to think beyond just one season ahead. You're trying to figure out, you're trying to do the matrix and figure out everything in terms of roster and obviously salary cap. And sometimes you draft a player that may not make sense in the moment with the plans that it will make sense down the road. So I had Chicago 20th on my big board, and offensive line was an issue for me, but edge rush was the bigger issue. And I thought, okay, we can get some edge rushers later. So that's interesting. And I completely understand what you're talking about with the Bears going 4 overall. All right. Number 5, this should come as no surprise either, especially in light of the recent news of Derek Carr's shoulder, which apparently was not breaking news to the organization, but it was certainly eye-opening to me when I heard it a couple days ago. So the Saints are going to be pick number 5 for me. They're number 3 on my big board because the quarterback situation, once again, and it feels like, and Rand, you can correct me if I'm wrong, in that division, they're maybe a couple players away. And if you get the quarterback right, and it's going to be hard if you're starting a rookie, but Kellen Moore has a track record of getting the most out of both young and old quarterbacks, and that division feels like it's always perennially pretty wide open. So I had them going here at 5. You think if they get this draft right and get the quarterback right, they're a playoff team, right?
No, I think so. And like you said, I mean, this the NFC South is traditionally wide open. I think it's on rare occasions. I think Sean Payton had a nice run during his tenure with the Saints, where they won multiple South championships in a row. But I do think this division is wide open. And if you look at this division right now, with the exception of Baker Mayfield, you have a young quarterback in Bryce Young in Carolina, and you have Michael Penix in
Mm.
Atlanta. And so you have the Saints need to come in and make sure they have a steady quarterback that can play, because Derek Carr missed time last year, I think, with a rib injury.
Yep.
And so you were forced to play a young Spencer Rattler who probably wasn't quite ready. So you bring in Kellen Moore this year, who had, like you said, has experience in developing quarterbacks, both young and old. And so you feel like now with another Derek Carr injury, why not now? Why not start over and get this thing rolling under Kellen Moore in his first year as head coach?
Right, exactly. I mean, they've seen Jake Hayner, they've seen Spencer Rattler. It's a new head coach, and if he feels differently about the direction that he wants to go offensively, that would make sense there. In reality, the Saints pick ninth. They're fifth on our big board mock draft here in terms of team needs. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Rand will be on the clock with pick 6 in this team needs mock draft right after this.
One of golf's elite courses, Quail Hollow, hosts the game's top players at the PGA Championship this May on CBS.
All right, Rand, you are up. Pick 6. Who you got?
Pick 6. I might surprise you a little bit. Maybe not. But I went with the Las Vegas Raiders and their need at wide receiver. And so I went there. I mean, while most, myself included, have mocked them to take a running back, most notably Ashton Genty at pick 6, looking into it more, I think there's more of a pressing need at wide receiver. And especially understanding the depth level of this class at running back, I feel you can get a running back later to complement some of the guys that they have now. But if you look at it, their leading receiver in terms of catches, yards, and touchdowns last year was their rookie tight end. And so, you look at that, and then Jacoby Myers logged his first 1,000-yard season, of his career. So you traded for Geno Smith. You want to bolster that offense and be more explosive. And I think they need another perimeter player to help, stretch the field and create more for those guys underneath. And so I went with their need at wide receiver as number 6 on the big board.
Yeah, Vegas was 8 on my big board. And I actually had running back listed just ahead of wide receiver in team needs, or you did originally. I'm acting like I wrote this up. But your point is an important one, because the running back class is incredibly deep. And even if there's a huge gap in your mind between Ashton Genty and Amari Hampton, or whomever your running back 2 is, there's a drop off at wide receiver. And let's start here. So last year it was Marvin Harrison went number 3. Then Malik Neighbors went to the Giants. Then I think Rome Odunze went top 10 to the Bears. I think he was the 3rd wide receiver off the board. And then we had Brian Thomas Jr. And then at the bottom, we had Ricky Pearsall, Xavier Legette. And I think there was one or two more players in there that escape me right now. Where would Tyrell McMillan rank among last year's wide receiver group?
For me, he would probably be just above Ricky Pearsall.
Okay.
In how I saw it is where he would fall in. He's just as, those guys that you named, Marvin Harrison Jr., you have Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas Jr., Rome Odunze. Like Brian Thomas Jr. is probably a little bit more recency bias in knowing what he's done already, so it'd be hard to put anybody above him, haven't seen what we've seen. But I think he would probably come in just above Ricky Pearsall.
So that's bottom half of the first round if we're basing him on last year's draft class. And Ashton Genty feels like to me, and you can correct me if you want, in the same conversation as Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs. He's a little shorter, a couple inches shorter, but in terms of what he brings to an offense, in which case he's a top half of the first round. You agree with that?
Well, I'm partial when it comes to the running backs. I think Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan are completely different animals.
So you wouldn't put him in that conversation?
No, not for me.
Okay.
Because I really love both of those guys coming out. And I think both of those guys, depending on how you value running backs, and most people don't, but to me, those guys could also be seen as offensive weapons. Right. Because you can move them around. You can do multiple things. I mean, we've talked about it on the pod already with Jahmyr and just his foot quickness. And we were both at Alabama's Pro Day when he came out, and just the display of his foot quickness and ability to get in and out of cuts was something I hadn't seen in a very, very long time. And then Bijan was probably about as close to a Saquon Barkley comparison as you could get coming out. And so I put those guys on a little different tier than I would Ashton Genty.
Fair enough. And I think Bijan may have just run under 4.5, but I think Jameer was in the 4.4s, 4.3 range, maybe, right?
Yeah, so Jameer was 4.36, and I want to say Bijan was 4.46 to 4.48, somewhere in that range.
And Ashton didn't run. He outruns everyone once he hits the second level, but he didn't run, so we don't have a true time on him. So there's the disparity there, and he's going to be 2 or 3 inches shorter than those players as well. Maybe not a big deal in terms of running back position as opposed to tight end or wide receiver. But I was going to make a dollar bet, but then I looked up Bijan's rookie season. He almost ran for 1,000 yards and had another 500 yards of receiving, so I can't make a dollar bet on that.
And he shared time.
So, yeah, I'll circle back on that one, have a better idea of how I can win a dollar bet. Hey, quickly, and you mentioned Brock Bowers balling out. How surprised were you, I guess is what I said, how I want to ask this, because I knew he was good. We know he had the ankle injury, he had the tightrope procedure, I believe, that last year and came back at Georgia and then balled out in that first game back. How surprised were you that he is one of the best players in the NFL after one season?
I wasn't surprised at all. He was one of the higher graded guys I had on my board, period. And he was just a player that you just knew instantly, like, all right, this guy's a beast. He's a stud. And if you get him within the right offense setup that would allow him to showcase his ability, then it was going to be, lights out for him. And the Raiders got put in a situation where they traded away Devontae, and so their number one weapon became him, and he just took it by the horns. I think he had 111 catches on the season, which is absurd for a rookie, let alone a rookie tight end. So he's a beast. He's a baller, and has been that ever since he came out of the Bay Area and went to the SEC. As a freshman, he balled out in the SEC. So it's no surprise for me.
And he did it with, let's be honest, average to below average quarterback play week in and week out, and no help in terms of other targets to take the pressure off of him. So one last question, and then I'll make my pick here. Which player makes life easier for Brock Bowers, Ashton Genty or Tet McMillan?
I would probably say Tet McMillan,
okay.
Just because he's a bigger presence, and especially when you get to the red zone, particularly the low red, you have that option of the 50-50 ball with Tet,
right?
Which now some of the coverage is going to have to rotate over there, and then that gives Brock Bowers more of an ability to play the middle of the field and get some options and some choice routes, and some matchups for him. So I think the receiver, whether it's Tet or whomever, because they can choose whomever they want to choose, I think the receiver allows you to be a little bit more creative in creating the matchups for Brock Bowers.
Man, Geno Smith, he could have a huge year. I'm excited about how that's going to work out for him. Super angry my Steelers didn't trade a third-round pick for Geno, but Omar didn't call me back, so here we are. All right, number 7, that's my pick. And these guys are number 5 on my big board in terms of team needs. And I'm thinking similarly to what you were talking about with the Chicago Bears, but this team has a long way to go compared to Chicago. Maybe not. We'll see. New England Patriots. Offensive line has to be a serious consideration. I don't want to say overdraft, and I know that you guys in the media maybe had some questions about why you would take J.C. Latham and move him to the left side, but Will Campbell and or Kelvin Banks or whomever are my Mimbu. They're not in the same conversation as J.C. coming out, I think, in terms of grades and size and probably athleticism. I think Kelvin Banks is a pretty good athlete. Mimbu's a pretty good athlete, but I know that obviously I have your thoughts on Mimbu specifically. But what did you see from JC that made you feel comfortable with the idea of giving him an opportunity to play left?
I mean, he's a big dancing bear, and that's what, that's a scouting term we like to use, and it's probably a little oversaturated. But JC he was big, he was athletic, he had great length, and he was strong and powerful. So at the end of the day, you knew that there weren't very many people that were going to be able to run down the middle of him, right, and condense the pocket. And so just seeing him move and having a chance to see him work out, you felt comfortable, with him playing left tackle. If you remember Orlando Brown, when he came out, everyone said he couldn't play left tackle because he was slow-footed and didn't have the foot quickness but he's been a Pro Bowl player. A guy I played with back in Florida who played with your Pittsburgh Steelers and won Super Bowls, Max Starks, wasn't considered a top flight athlete, but all he ever did was start at offensive tackle, particularly at left tackle for a Super Bowl winner. So that made me, having those reference points made me comfortable with suggesting JC play left tackle.
And the thing is, and Max Starks, shout out to Max Starks, he sort of personified enormous. I don't know if he felt like he was taller than 6'6", but he blocked out the sun. JC was a better athlete, it felt like.
Yeah, JC was a much better athlete.
Yeah.
And like you said, shout out to Big Max, one of my favorite teammates I've ever, played with. But Max was in the 6'8" range. And, if you went with his combine weight, he was probably 350. But back then, a walking Max Starks on a day-to-day basis was probably closer to 65, 70, 365, 370 range. But like you said, you had to get around all of that mass, and that was a tough thing for people to do.
I'm pretty sure that Max's family, you can correct me, they were in the funeral business, and they could have had Max dress up as the Grim Reaper when he visited people. He would just scare them. That's probably disrespectful.
Well, Max's nickname in college, and I don't know if it carried with him to Pittsburgh, but we called him the Undertaker.
Okay. And
so that was his nickname. And I'm not sure a lot of people know, but Max is he's from the Browner family. If you go and do your research and look at all the Joey Browners, and it was a bunch of those guys. So Max's dad is a Browner. And so that explains where he gets, his massive size from. Because if you knew Mama Starks was a little small lady. But like I said, man, Max was a really solid player that personified what it meant to be a Pittsburgh Steelers offensive lineman for a long time in the league.
Yeah, man. Shout out to 78 for the Steelers and the Gators. All right. New England Patriots are at 7. Offensive line help is a big need there. And you got to protect Drake May. So that's the thinking. Pick 8. You're on the board, Rand.
Pick 8 went off the beaten path here. And I'll challenge you a little bit as to why, but I went with the Los Angeles Chargers and their need at defensive line.
Oh.
So and my challenge to you would be this, and this is no disrespect to anybody. Let me throw this disclaimer out there. But can you name anyone on the Chargers D line right now? That's not an edge guy.
Odabanya? Is that how you pronounce his name? Is he on the Chargers?
No.
He might be on the Cowboys. I can't.
So I would say this, Ryan, that was my point, right? Because I don't think this roster has very many holes, because they are a good team. But when you look at it and you look at the construction of their defensive line group, like it becomes a need for them, and them in real life picking at pick 22, there are going to be plenty of options for them to pick a D lineman just due to the depth of this draft. And so right now you have Tier Tart, you have Deshaun Hand, and Naquan Jones, who are 3 of the 5 members of that defensive line group, and those 3 I just named will all be UFAs following the season. And then you have Scott Matlock, who's been a backup defensive lineman, but he also doubles as the team starting fullback. And so therefore, right now you're entering the draft portion of the offseason with only 5 defensive linemen under contract. And so that this is a position that they're going to have to fill. And I think this is a glaring need for them. So that's why I went with the Chargers defensive line group for me at pick 8.
That's a good call. And I actually had them ranked lower because I was thinking mostly tight end and wide receiver, but defensive line is much more important. So if Colston Loveland is sitting there and whoever your favorite defensive lineman is, Kenneth Grant, whomever, who are you taking if you're Jim Harbaugh? And
say that one more time.
If you're the Chargers and you're sitting there at 22 and Colston Loveland's there, or your favorite defensive lineman, who are you going to take?
I'm taking my favorite defensive lineman.
Yeah.
And to me, that just makes the most sense because, I don't want to say that you can always find a tight end, but you've had success being able to find tight ends later.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily have to spend that resource, early when you can address a need and get a good quality play.
In fact, it feels like Brock Bowers are more rare than finding guys later in the draft that can contribute, because typically the offense doesn't run through the tight end anyway, unless you have been playing in the league for 5 or 6 years, like a George Kittle, but George Kittle has help, or Travis Kelce. And Travis Kelce sometimes is the only show in town when the wide receivers are banged up in Kansas City, but that feels rare for rookies to come in and do that. All right, next up, pick 9. Just going right down my board here. Yeah, Kevin Costner could learn a lesson. Just have your board set, and you don't have to do all this dancing around. This is how deep down the draft day rabbit hole I went. I went back and watched a video from Tom Telesco when he was with the Chargers. They had him watch draft day and comment. And one of his first comments was that their draft board basically had one name at each position, their horizontal board. And he's like, what are we doing? We can't even get that part right. So my horizontal board is a little deeper than that. All right, here we go. And this group is number 6. This team is on my team needs board. So I have them going number 9, Houston Texans. And you know where it's going to go. Again, offensive line is a huge need. You just gave the stat about how many sacks C.J. Stroud took last year. They have a new offensive coordinator, and they have to get the offensive line situation settled. They moved on from a lot of guys on the interior. They need some help at tackle. And at 9, you're going to get that if that's where you go off the board here. But just in general, even with a nameless group of players at certain positions, I'm taking the Houston Texans here at 9. Offensive line, get that team back on track. And if you can protect CJ, I think you're cooking. All right, we're at pick 10 here. What are we doing, Rand?
Pick 10, I went with the Patriots need at edge. Now, I know that we've talked about.
Oh, hey, I already took the Patriots. They're off the board.
Oh, you took the Patriots. Yeah. Oh, okay.
I took him at 7.
You took him at 7. All right. Well, let's adjust and let's go the Rams at inside linebacker.
All right.
And the reason I say that is because if you look at 2024, they struggled to replace Ernest Jones, who they traded to the Tennessee Titans. And they had a bunch of guys that they kind of shuffled through. And if you look at the guys that are currently penciled in to start at the inside linebacker right now, as we see it, you have Troy Reader and a 2024 UDFA and Omar Spence. And so this position needs to be upgraded to help stabilize the middle of their defense. And, being honest, if you're looking at it, I'm not totally sure how the construction and the allocation of resources fits for this defensive system as it pertains to the inside linebacker position, and how they value it. Do they value other positions more than they value the inside linebacker spot? But this, to me, is a huge glaring hole, for them, especially playing in that division. And you got to face Kyle Shanahan, and now with a very similar system in Clint Kubiak in Seattle, that's going to put a lot of pressure on those inside linebackers in their offense with their offensive scheme. And so I think, the Rams really need to upgrade that spot and get a younger, more athletic and more explosive there.
Love it. All right. Want to keep going, Debo, or take a break at 10?
Keep going for a little bit.
Okay. All right. Next up, pick 11. And this feels like they're a player or two away. You could certainly make a case for the offensive line. They can stay healthy there. Maybe they make some strides there. But I think the biggest need for this team is actually edge rusher. And I'm going with the Cincinnati Bengals here, pick 11. I don't understand the Trey Hendrickson thing. I say that every time we bring it up, because all Trey Hendrickson did against the Steelers was dominate whoever was playing quarterback or who was playing tackle on his way to the quarterback. And I know I think he's age 30. I don't think that's a concern for me. He should be one of the highest paid edge rushers in the league based on his production, and I think he can maintain that production over the next couple of years. But let me ask you this, Rand, just about the Bengals in particular, who I'm taking here at 11, primarily because of edge. When you start devoting so much money to one position, and by that I mean the wide receivers and T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, that does affect how you pay out guys in the rest of the roster. Does it make sense to devote however many percentages points to paying these wide receivers like number 1s and number 2s?
Oh, yeah. I mean, because you've already committed the assets to the quarterback, right? And so you have to do what you have to do to make that quarterback right and to make sure that he's successful. And ultimately, at the end of the day, you got to be able to score points. And if the game comes down to a close game and your defense can't get a stop and you're in a 1-score game, and Joe Burrow has the ball with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase on the field, you like your chances of being able to go down and score and either tie the game or win the game.
I get it. But at some point, I mean, can't remember who's the defense. I feel like Kevin Costner now. Who's the defensive coordinator? They fired because they couldn't stop anybody.
Lou Anarumo.
Yeah, they just fired Lou Anarumo because that defense was getting run through every single time they took the field. So maybe they're not one player away, but I feel like they get an edge rusher and they're able to keep Trey Hendrickson, and you get that edge rusher on the rookie deal. That at least helps you in some sense. I understand keeping T. Higgins, and T. Higgins is a great example of someone that the media just overthought. Like, oh, he's not a first-round pick because he ran 4.5 or whatever he ran. That dude was a first-round pick all day long. So I understand that, and the matchup problems are endless when you talk about him and Jamar Chase. One thing I could do without is Mike Gesicki doing the stupid gritty. Like, I was super upset they re-signed him just for that sole reason. Like an 8-yard gain on 3rd and 15, he's doing the gritty. Man, get off the field. All right, next up, pick 12. Who you got?
I'll stay with you with the edge and go Carolina at edge.
Okay.
And you go there because they traded, one of the better young pass rushers in Brian Branch last offseason, to the Giants. And last year, Ashawn Robinson, as well as Jadeveon Clowney, finished tied for the team lead in sacks with just 5.5. And so you look there, Clowney would be 32 years old, entering his 12th season. And then DJ Wanham, who they signed a couple years ago, he had 4 sacks last year. And so he's entering the final year of his deal there on the edge. And so you have to upgrade this position. Now, their defense coordinator, Ejiro Evero, because of his blitz package, he's done a really good job of being able to manufacture some pass rush, being able to blitz. But how often do you want to put your corners in your secondary in those man-to-man situations? And you won't have to do that if you get a guy off the edge that can come in and create pass rush on his own. So I went there with Carolina at the edge.
Yeah, and that team feels like it's maybe turning the corner. The offensive line, Ike Ekwonu, there were questions about him coming into last year. Feels like he sort of figured it out. And obviously Bryce got benched week 2, came back, and then he played much better. So credit to Dave Canales and Dan Morgan for helping give that what feels like getting that team on the right tracks. All right, next up, pick 13 here. I went with the Baltimore Ravens. They picked 27 in real life, but I think they're an offensive lineman away from hopefully, fingers crossed, finally getting past the Bills and or the Chiefs, because we know what Lamar can do. They have Daniel Faalele and then Andrew Voorhees on the interior, and I think if we're naming names, if you get someone like a Tyler Booker there or Donovan Jackson, man, that solves a lot of problems. They brought back Ronnie Stanley. They have Roger Rosengarten coming into year 2, the former University of Washington right tackle. So I went with the Baltimore Ravens offensive line, pick 13 on the big board. Team needs mock draft. Rand, you were pick 14.
So at pick 14, I went Arizona and then their need at wide receiver. I know in our previous mock draft, I mocked the corner, Will Johnson, who we talked about earlier, and understand and know that they spent a top 5 pick on Marvin Harrison Jr. last year, who had a solid rookie season.
Yep.
He was second on the team in catches and yards and led the team with 8 receiving touchdowns. But they're going to need somebody opposite of him that can stretch the field, is going to pull coverages away for him and tight end Trey McBride, who they just extended, this offseason, who's going to be a huge part, of that offense. Now, last year, their number 2 and number 3 receivers were Michael Wilson and Greg Dortch, who both averaged less than 12 yards a catch, respectively. Michael Wilson averaged 11.7 and Greg Dortch, averaged 9.2. So with Kyler Murray's ability to escape, extend plays, and having the arm strength that he has to throw the ball downfield, I think they're going to need an outside vertical threat to help really open up that offense.
No, that makes sense for sure. All right, pick 15 here, and then we'll take a break. Next up on my big board, Miami Dolphins. So Teron Armstead announced that he would retire, and I had them as actually number 10 on my team needs big board. They go 15 here just because obviously Brandon and I are alternating picks, and they pick 13th in real life. But they could get offensive line help at tackle. They signed James Daniels, but they could even get help on the interior if they wanted to. And here's the perception about the Miami Dolphins from the media, Rand, and you can either ignore this or answer it or pretend like you didn't hear me. But it feels like once the weather turns, that team gets soft. Like they're great at home. in the fall. And then once the weather gets cold and they have to travel, they don't look to be the same team. I don't know if there's another team in the league that when their quarterback isn't there, they look completely different. I think that speaks to how good Tua has been. And obviously, you work with Mike McDaniel in San Francisco, right? So
Yes, I did.
yeah, so it's clear to me he knows what he's doing when Tua's on the field, and when you don't have your number one quarterback, things get iffy, and that's for every team. But it feels like more so for Miami than any other team. So I'm going to try to protect Tua at all costs. Insist that he does not take a single hit. Just throw the ball away. Don't ever run. And if you can get that offensive line where it needs to be, I think this team we could start taking them seriously in once the weather turns. You want to comment on the idea that once the weather turns, they don't play as nearly as tough as maybe they do when it's hot outside?
I mean, honestly, if you look at it, I mean, their advantage in the earlier part of the season is the South Florida humidity,
Yeah,
which has made cowards of us all.
the truth.
Most notably at the Miami Pro Day, but and playing up in that AFC, that AFC East, and you got to go to Buffalo and you have to go to New England and face those, those tough challenges with the weather. It does play a part, and especially when you have, the type of offense that they run, and which is generated off on speed and athleticism. And so
Yeah.
I can understand where those shortcomings come. But like you said, if they address these needs, particularly offensive linemen, and get a different type of mentality in there, I think these guys have what it takes, to take the next step and become a perennial playoff team that could push, for those late January games.
Yeah, absolutely. And that division is getting better. We know about the Buffalo Bills, but with Drake May coming on, with Mike Vrabel there in New England, I think they're going to be back in the mix more so than they have been in the last few years. So we shall see. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We're almost to the halfway point here. We'll hit pick 16. This team needs mock draft right after this. All right, Rand, pick 16. Halfway point here. Who you got?
Let's go with the Denver Broncos and their running back need.
Oh, boy.
We've talked about this, this position. I know personally in the mock, I had Amarion Hampton from North Carolina going there and being available to him at pick 20. But they're going to, whoever it is, because I've seen some now where Ashton Genty could fall down to pick 20. Regardless of whoever is there, if there's a guy that they like at 20, they should definitely consider taking it just to help pair with Jaleel McLaughlin. Love the guy, the way he plays, but he's 5'7", he's 187 pounds, and his body just isn't meant to carry the load. And so they're going to need that. And then they spent a 5th-round pick last year on Audric Estime, who's a tough physical runner, but he just lacks that home run threat. I think what would help make a Sean Payton offense go is to have a home run threat at the running back position that can do things not only in the run game, but in the passing game. Because if you go back to Sean's days in New Orleans, when he had Pierre Thomas, that screen game, had the NFL in a frenzy. No one could defend that screen game, and it gave them, trouble, gave a lot of teams trouble. And I think adding the type of back that could be effective that way would really help this offense and the young quarterback in Bo Nix.
I've said it before, but I'll keep repeating it. And you've talked about both George Payton and Sean Payton. The turnaround that program has undergone in the last 12 months is nuts, because this team feels like it's only missing a player or two, and that player is a running back, and it's not a quarterback or an edge rusher and a left tackle. And it doesn't feel like they're going to threaten the Chiefs, but they feel like they're going to be going to the playoffs a lot in the future. Let me ask you, how important, or let me put it this way, what do you want to see from Bo Nix in year 2 if you're in the front office in Denver, the head coach, to make sure that he continues to be going in the right direction?
I think the easy thing to say is you just want to see him take the next step, right? Because you're not in the building. You don't particularly know what he was asked to do. I know we've talked about it here on the pod about him taking the check down, which in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with that. You take the easy completion and you allow your playmakers to go make plays for you. And so I don't have a problem with that, because you're living to see another down and you're moving the ball down the field, and everything doesn't have to be hero ball. You want to see him take probably grow in the area of being more aggressive with the football when it makes sense. If you look at a Sean Payton offense, the only way you're going to score points is if you're aggressive with the ball. right? And you have to be able to give your receivers, your pass catchers chance in those 50-50, ball situations. And so you probably want to see him take a little bit more chances with the ball, but I have no problem with him taking the check down, taking the easy completion, and living to see another down.
I think you said last pod you were relatively high on Bo Nix coming out.
Yeah, I was relatively high. I'm not going to sit here and say I saw him doing what he's going to do, but although I did watch the Auburn tape, I took what I saw more with him at Oregon than I did with letting the Auburn tape cloud my mind with what I've seen in the past. The way I break down film, no matter what position of the player, I look at previous year, I take notes, make an evaluation, and then I look at current year and see where that player has improved. And when I did that with Bo, I saw improvement. And so it led me to believe that there was some continual improvement still left for him to have.
And we've seen that for sure. I mean, because I did not think it would be as good as it was for him. And we'll see how year 2 goes. But credit to him and Sean and George for getting that one right. Hey, Debo, we're at the halfway point. Any overarching thoughts? Anything you like? Anything you hate?
You guys are crushing this draft.
That'll be the first and
Got
last
the
time we do
recap.
that.
Got the recap on screen just to kind of see where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, Titans still number 1 at the halfway point. Rand takes the Denver Broncos. They picked 20th in real life. They were 23rd on my board, so right around that range. I think the biggest shock for me, I don't want to call it a shock, was Rand taking the Bears at 4, but that's because the offensive line need, and he outlined why with Braxton Jones, because I was thinking more edge rush. All right, let's go on to pick 17.
Secondary yet.
Oh, yeah.
I think, no secondary yet, no tight ends.
Yeah. Yeah, and I had the Chargers' biggest need as tight end, and Rand obviously made the point that defensive line is more important, and I think that I agree with that. I'm looking here, I have a couple teams with defensive back as their primary need, so we'll see where those guys go off the board in these final 16 picks here. Next up for me, pick 17, going to Kansas City Chiefs. And there are two needs here, defensive line and offensive line, and I don't know if Jalen Moore is the answer. Were you there when they drafted Jalen, or had you already of San Francisco?
I was there. I was there with Jalen.
You can comment on this, but I feel like if there's a left tackle, and there may not be one to the bottom of the first round, maybe you move up, maybe you go defensive line there. But if there's a left tackle you feel good about, even if someone like Josh Simmons, who we know has the knee injury he's coming back from, if he's cleared medically and you feel good about it, he's an interesting player in terms of the athleticism and the size and the movement skills. He has a little edge to him as well. Or you can go defensive line here if you're the Chiefs and get help for Chris Jones inside there and restock the position that way, because they've lost some guys in the offseason, defensive line as well. So pick 17, Kansas City Chiefs. And correct me, Rand, Jalen was a 4th-round pick?
Yes, he was a 4th-round pick. And to your point with the Kansas City offensive line, I definitely get it. Because Jalen battled injuries during my time, in San Francisco. So wasn't able to, stay healthy, when he was forced to play. And so that's going to play a role in it. But then you got to remember they took the BYU tackle in the 2nd round last year, which they probably want to see him play a little bit better, moving forward, which is also the reason why you go and sign a Jalen. But I also think if you're adding another offensive tackle to that spot, you're kind of clouding the position. And there's only so many guys can play at a time. And so now you're almost restricting the development of the BYU tackle at this point if you bring in a Jalen and you take a guy in the 1st round.
No, that's a good point. So Kingsley Sumataya, they drafted in the 2nd round last year, and he had to play a little bit, and it was inconsistent and not a surprise there. I think they've had some conversations about moving him inside, so we'll see where that ends up. But if there's no offensive tackle drafted, I would imagine he'll have an opportunity to play tackle along with Jalen Moore. And they could even shore up the interior if they wanted to, since they moved on from Joe Thuney. But defensive line makes sense for me there as well, because to give Chris Jones some help for sure. All right, pick 18. What do we got, Rand?
All right, so Debo mentioned it. He's said that there's no secondary guys have gone yet. So for me, this is where you're going to see the run on some of the secondary. Okay. So let's go with the Jags at corner. They extended Tyson Campbell, last year. It's probably to the surprise of some, but he's a piece that they believe in, and I think they need another starter, opposite of him. You can make an argument for them to take another receiver, which we've done, in our mock drafts here. But I think corner is a more pressing need for them. They have the pass rush. They have guys there that can rush the passer and really get after it. And I know early on, some people feel like, obviously 5 is a reach, right, to where you would take one of these corners. But I've also felt like the number 5 pick for Jacksonville is a trade up spot. And especially with a new GM, a new head coach that are probably looking to add more draft capital, this is a position in which they could address if they move back in the draft for a team that wants to trade up for whatever position they're looking for.
All right, there you go, Debo. You got your DB off the board. What are we at? 19? Yep. And I'm going to go with a position that's been undervalued in recent years. Rand would disagree, but I'm going with the Dallas Cowboys here at 19, and I'm leading with running back. They got to get a running back. And they're actually 12th on my board overall. They actually picked 12th in real life, so there's some synergy there. But the reason I'm thinking why I have them this high, whether it's running back or you can go wide receiver here if you want to, they got to help Dak and they got to help CD. And cornerback is also a need, but I think that's third after the two positions we talked about here. And help Dak, help CD, help Brian Schottenheimer, because I know Cowboys fans weren't super excited about that hire that was announced late on a Friday earlier this year, much to the chagrin of many fans. I like to take shots at what Jerry Jones says and does, which seem to be two separate things. But I'm going with running back here at 12 for the Dallas Cowboys. Excuse me, they picked 12th. They're 12th on my big board. They pick 19th in our team needs mock draft here. All right, pick 20, Rand.
Pick 20. Let's go with the Atlanta Falcons.
Okay.
And edge. Probably should have been a little higher, on my board, just in terms of overall need. They've spent a lot of resources here to make sure that this position was addressed. And I know that they've come out in full force in terms of having their head coach, their GM, and their coordinator at, these edge guys pro days. And so I feel like this is a position where they really need to get right. Again, in this division, you got to be able to get after the passer. And so I feel like this is a position for the Atlanta Falcons that once and for all, they need to get right and need to address.
Okay, I like it. I actually had them 14th on my big board, so a little bit higher than this, but this feels about like the range as we get through this list here. Just ahead of them on my big board, and they're still available. And that's the team I'm going with here, the San Francisco 49ers at pick 21. And Debo, I'm going to go with defensive line. They have Jordan Elliott. They have Evan Anderson, Kevin Givens, and Kalia Davis, who actually loved coming out several years ago, but he'd been injured coming out, and I would imagine he's still battling those injuries. But they need to bolster this defensive line, and that's a huge concern. We've talked about off-ball linebackers. They need as well to help out Fred Warner. You could even go cornerback. You could go offensive line if you're thinking about a world without Trent Williams, or maybe interior offensive line in the short term. So there are a number of directions this team can go. They've been super busy, mostly sending guys out of the building this free agency and trying to get things sorted out salary cap wise. They got to pay Brock Purdy. But I'm going to go primarily San Francisco, targeting defensive line here at pick 21, although offensive line would also be something I can understand for the 49ers. All right, pick 22, Rand.
Let's go back to the secondary for my man Debo, and let's go Minnesota and their need at safety. I think it takes a lot to play safety in a Brian Flores defense, and it's a lot on their plates. And I think that's why you still have a 36-year-old Harrison Smith back there patrolling, the middle of the field, who's entering his 14th season, in the NFL. So I know that they like their young group and the guys that they have in that room, but I also think there's a reason why you continue to bring back a 36-year-old safety and you haven't replaced him yet. And the way that they use Josh Metellus, he's like a hybrid big nickel, plays that type of role for them. So I think they really need to finally address this position and have a passing of the torch from Harrison Smith and whomever they bring in next. And, just for context, Metellus is also entering the final year of his deal. So they're going to need a safety there. Now, granted, they only have 4 picks in this draft. So, the pickings are slim.
If you're picking either in this team needs mock draft or in real life, where they pick 24th, and Nick Emanwari out of South Carolina and Malachi Starks out of Georgia are there, who are you taking?
I'm taking Malachi Starks for me, just because, and I get the measurables, I get the testing numbers, but Malachi Starks is such a football player. He's versatile. He's a guy that can move around and play a lot of these same roles that a Josh Metellus has played in this defense. And so I think for me, I would take Malachi Starks.
All right. Also, a troubling development here as I'm keeping notes. Like the red are my picks and the yellow are your picks. Like this is my draft board from top to bottom. The teams that I had at the bottom of the draft needs are the ones you're taking, and I'm taking the ones at the top. So that's a concern that maybe I'm not doing this right. So we'll see. This will be the first time that I've second guessed myself on the podcast with a GM. But as I like to say, Rand, this podcast is a launching point for people to get into bigger and better things. Once they come from the league, they come here, and then we set them off to do other bigger things. So you got that to look forward to.
Listen, we've had this conversation. But
hey, man, maybe one day you could be Debo. You could be producing podcasts all over CBS.
I'll leave that to Debo.
He's traveling all over the place. He's at RV parks working from there. He's living his best life. All right, next up. This is pick 23, Debo. And I'm going to go to New York Jets. I had them 15th on my team needs board. They are 23rd here. And offensive line has been the primary conversation when we do these mock drafts. And that's what I'm thinking here in terms of helping Justin Fields in the near term. You can draft a quarterback if you want on day 2 or trade up into the first round and get one here. But I think offensive line, especially right tackle, makes the most sense. They got Fashanu playing left tackle this year, their first round pick from a year ago. They have Elijah Vera-Tucker when he's healthy. He's a road grader. And Carter Warren is penciled in, the former day 3 guy to Pitt is at right tackle. I know that you're not as high on Armand Mimbu as I am, Rand, but I don't hate the idea of him coming in as a 20-year-old. And I think Ola was 20 as well last year, 2021 when he came out. He was pretty young, just because I think he's going to get bigger, stronger, faster. I'm guessing you're okay with offensive line, but Armand Mimbu at 7, that seemed to bring a look to your face.
No, because as soon as you said the Jets and offensive line, I was waiting on the Mimbu mention, just because I know that's your guy. That's why the look was that. I like Mimbu, and I do think he's a first round talent. 7 is a little rich for me. But if you're basing it on your need and the upside that he has, like you said, he's 20 years old and there's still more in his body that you can get out of it. I understand it, but it's a little rich for me.
What do you do? How do you reconcile? Do you go with your team numbers when at the Senior Bowl he's 6'3" and 3/8 or whatever, then at the Combine he's 6'4", and not necessarily his arms, but we know Will Campbell's arms grown, like they grow from 33 and 3/8 to 34. What do you do anything with that? Do you talk about that in the meetings? How do you reconcile all that?
Yeah, I mean, it's when you bring the guy in on a 30 visit, you can get a height for it to have your official height. So it's, you understand it, and you know that there's a range. And let's be honest, how much of a difference is it from 6'0" to 6'0" It's like right. It's not really noticeable, to be honest with you. And so you just really let the tape lead you. And if it shows up on tape as being a problem, then I'm pretty sure it's going to be a problem.
I think that's the way to think about it. But of course, we got to talk about these things, Rand. All right, next up, pick 24. What do you got?
Let's go Buffalo and the need at corner. I think quietly this position has been a revolving door for Buffalo secondary. And this offseason, they rewarded their 2022 6th-round pick, Christian Benford, with a $69 million extension. I just think they need a starter opposite of him because they traded away 2022 first-round pick, Kyer Elam, to Dallas. And so I think this is a big need for them. Now, granted, they play a lot of zone, in a Sean McDermott's offense. So you've been able to plug and play some younger guys that you've taken in later positions. But I think they need to solidify this position because this is a group that, like you said, most of the teams we talked about earlier, they weren't one position or two away. This is a group that's one position or two away from really competing and getting over that hump. And I think it starts with them addressing the need at secondary corner.
So let's see. Let's say if Trey Amos, for example, if you like Trey Amos, the Ole Miss corner, let's say it's Trey Amos and then Robert Golden, the wide receiver out of Texas, is there. Because I think that's a need for Buffalo, but you think cornerback's a bigger need. You would lean towards Trey Amos as your favorite cornerback as opposed, let's say cornerback 2 as opposed to your wide receiver 2 for this team?
Yeah, I would personally.
Okay.
Just because you've addressed this position at corner, at receiver, excuse me. You took Keon Coleman in the second round last year. You just rewarded the kid out of Boise State a couple years ago. His name escapes me right now.
Khalil Shakir.
And you also have Dalton Kincaid, who's a problem for you underneath, and you have James Cook out of the backfield. So I think with their new model and their way of going and approaching offense is just being able to spread the ball around and not necessarily have a clear-cut number one guy that you have to constantly feed the ball to. It's just get open and Josh will find you and get you the ball.
Yeah, and that's true. Josh Allen solves a lot of problems. All right, pick 25. This team was 19th on my board. They're picking 3rd in real life overall. The New York Giants. Quarterback is softly the biggest need, but I think they've done better than a lot of these teams that need quarterbacks, and that they've signed Russ Wilson, and they've signed Jameis Winston, and they're okay for 2025 if that's the direction they want to go, even if they decide to draft a quarterback at 3, which I don't think they're going to do, but maybe later on day 2 they find a guy that they can develop. And so the Giants here, I'll put quarterback with an asterisk, Debo, but wide receiver could be a need here. You could continue to bolster the offensive line. They do have Malik Neighbors, and it feels like if Travis Hunter is there, he's more offense than defense, although what's Tay's last name? Deontay Banks has struggled with consistency, the former first-round pick out of Maryland. So 25, quarterback asterisk with Travis Hunter's name in parentheses if he's there. He ain't going to be there pick 25, and this team needs mock draft. But in terms of their overall needs compared to these other teams, they are now 25th off the board. All right, pick 26, Rand.
I went with the Colts and their need at tight end. And I'll just keep this as simple as I possibly can. The Colts tight end group as a whole only managed 39 catches last year.
Wow.
As a group. In contrast, there were 30 individual tight ends that had more catches than the entire tight end group that Indy had last year. That's it. Tight end, Indy.
I mean, when you say it like that, you could almost offer up 2 first-round picks if you're Chris Ballard for Brock Bowers, and that would actually make sense. Because that's literally triple the production of what the Indianapolis Colts tight ends gave you. Crazy. All right. Pick 26 here up to pick 27. Oh, with the Seattle Seahawks. They have their quarterback for now in Sam Darnold, but they need offensive line help. And the tackles, when healthy, they're young and very good. Abe Lucas and Charles Cross, but they battled injuries. I think on the interior, they need some help there, guard and even center. So, especially with Sam Darnold, we saw the last few games of the season where he really struggled once they started to pressure him. Looked like Sam Darnold of old. So you got to protect Sam Darnold. Offensive line is the need there, Debo, for pick 27, the Seattle Seahawks. All right, Rand, pick 28.
Pick 28. Let's go with Tampa Bay and their need at inside linebacker. Another position where you can just say, simply put, Levante David is returning for another year. I want to say that is around 14 years for him. And so they need to, I think he only re-signed on a 1-year deal. So you got to assume that this is his final year with both the Tampa Bay Bucks and in the NFL as a whole. So they need to address that position, get him a young running mate now that he can help teach and help eventually pass the torch to. So inside linebacker, Tampa.
It took 28 picks for our boards to align, which, again, very concerning for me that it took this far into the conversation. But here we are. Here we are. I thought this podcast would help build my self-esteem in a post-Rick world, and I don't think it's doing that. No comment from Rand. That's troubling as well. All right, here we go.
Leave it alone, man. I'm leaving it alone.
Pick 29. Green Bay Packers. Tampa Bay feels like a team. I know their fans get angry when you say this. They don't have a ton of needs. They got Baker right, and they're always winning that division, it feels like, under Todd Bowles. And linebacker is their biggest, most glaring need, it feels like. Maybe you go secondary, but I think 28 sounds about right in terms of when they come off. It picked 29 and went with the Green Bay Packers. Cornerback is a big need. It is sort of funny, Rand, that every time we talk to Packers fans, and even Mike Renner, who's a Packers fan, he talks about the importance of getting a number one wide receiver. They have so many young dudes that can play wide receiver and tight end. It's sort of a funny thing to say out loud, but they are convinced of that. I think cornerback's a little bit more important. We don't know what Jair Alexander's future is going to be. Probably not in Green Bay. They moved on from Eric Stokes, their former first-round pick out of Georgia. He battled injuries for much of his time in Green Bay. So 29, Green Bay Packers. Let's start with cornerback there, Debo. All right, pick 30 down the home stretch, Rand.
Pick 30 for me was Detroit. And their edge. Obviously, they really missed Aiden Hutchinson, down the stretch when he went down. Traded for Zadarius Smith at the deadline, and he did provide a spark for him. But I do think they need to add a legitimate presence opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. And this year, they kind of addressed the need with volume, signing Marcus Davenport and Al-Qadim Muhammad, but both of those are to one-year deals. And so right now, I think you need to add another edge guy for them to help, bolster that defense. And it's a really good defense. And like you said before, this is a team that does not have many holes, but they need to continue to look to add edge to their defense.
All right, pick 31. I think we're on the same page here. I went with Washington. Debo's Eagles are the best team on planet Earth with no needs. Way to go, Debo. The Washington Commanders need some help at edge rush, and that's not a huge surprise there. Even running back would be a consideration for me here at the bottom of the first round. In real life, they picked 30th, and here at 31 in this team needs mock draft. Like, I wouldn't be averse to the idea of Omari Hampton if he were there. I like Brian Robinson. They have Austin Eckler as well, but just in terms of helping out Jake Daniels. But edge rush to me is the most important position. They moved on from Jonathan Allen, I believe, the defensive lineman, and they could certainly think about that as well. But 31, the Commanders. All right, Rand, you get to tell Debo why his team's the best team on planet Earth.
Yeah, I mean, this is an embarrassment of riches with the Eagles. It's like, all right, close your eyes, do this, pick one, and just, whatever. I went with D-line instead of edge. I know a lot of our mocks have had edge, and there's likely a spot where they've gone. But if you lean on, tradition, Howie has typically taken an O lineman or D lineman in the first round. And so I think that will continue, because right now in your interior D line, outside of Pro Bowl tackle Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis, it's really an unheralded group, in there, because you lost Big Milton Williams to New England this offseason. And although they have their young edge guys, they do have depth at the position. So I think, they really need to continue to add to this interior D line, because you're going to have decisions coming up where you're going to have to make a decision on whether you do the fifth-year option on Jordan Davis, and if you extend him after, at the right time, and then the following year you have to make the same decision on Jalen Carter, which I'm pretty sure they're going to want to keep that guy around. So It's good to have a young defensive lineman in the hopper, ready to go, ready to roll and replace those guys. But one of my notes I took, I'm like, does Philly really need a defensive lineman? Maybe. And that's how I wrote it. Maybe, but this is probably one of the better, if not the best roster in the NFL right now.
Debo, you said for months now that you're not averse to the idea of defensive line, right?
Yeah, that's been the target all along. The Walter Nolans, the Donovans, I think D-line is clear. The only other position I'd say is safety, with the departure of Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, Reed Blankenship in a contract here. Right now it's if Sidney Brown can step up, or Tristan McCollum would be the opposite safety starter. So, if the Malakis or Emanwaris drop, I know Eagles fans have been targeting those guys as well.
I don't want to even think about Nick Emanwari on that team. Got enough to contend with Debo. All right, Debo, way to go. You're the best. Philadelphia Eagles, 32 in real life, 32 on this exercise. How did that work out, Debo? I thought it went pretty well. I was skeptical, I'll be honest with you.
Good. I think my biggest surprise came late with the Giants third in the actual draft, 25th in this draft.
Yeah, and I think part of that is just because, Rand, they have the quarterback situation sort of settled, at least for 2025, more so than these other teams that need quarterbacks at the top. You agree with that?
Yeah, no, and like you said, like you were saying when in your description as your why, and you put and I love the fact that you put the Travis Hunter thing in asterisk, right? Because like you said, you signed Paulson Adebo, you took Deontay Banks a couple years ago, who had a really good rookie season,
Yeah.
had experienced a little bit of the sophomore slump, and then you go over on the other side of the ball and you have Malik Neighbors, and you just paid Darius Slayton, and you have Wandale Robinson. You have guys there, and so yes, if you could land an all-star type player, then you address those spots, but they're not necessarily needs,
Right.
per se. So I understand and agree with where you went with it.
Awesome. All right, Debo, that's it. Episode 245 in the books. Wednesday will be on CBS Sports Network, and then Thursday, again, set your calendars. We'll be doing a 7-round mock draft live starting at 3 p.m. Eastern on the old YouTube machine at NFL on CBS. And we'll keep reminding you about that stuff. There'll be live chats. Devo will be there. Stryker will be there. So you guys can ask questions of Rand and guys like Brian McFadden, Lee J. Doozable, and anyone else that you want to talk to. And we'll be doing that again this Thursday. So thanks to my guy, Rand. Thanks, Devo, for producing. Thanks to you guys who watch, listen, and comment. And we'll see you Wednesday.